Good morning. Your Excellency, Mr. Vice President of Republic of Union of Myanmar, Your Excellency, Honorable Minister of Health, Ms. Yuriko, Regional Director, UNFPA, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be invited to address such a distinguished audience at this 8th Asia-Pacific Conference on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. I thank the organizers for this invitation. It is good to be back in Myanmar and to renew old friendships and old ties. I believe I'm speaking on this platform to represent the voices of those who need our attention, our action, and our support. The poorest, the most vulnerable, the most disadvantaged, the most stigmatized, and the most discriminated. These are the groups whose personal, social, and economic circumstances do not allow them voluntary access to health care and facilities. They are hard to reach, and we need to reach out to them. We can only do so if we eliminate all barriers and constraints, whether they be political, financial, social, cultural, religious, or attitudinal. The call for sexual and reproductive health and rights began in Cairo ICPD in 1994 and has continued to the period of the MDGs up to 2015. 22 years ago, we made promises to provide universal access to a comprehensive range of quality sexual and reproductive health services which are available, accessible, acceptable, affordable, within a continuum of care and embracing principles of human rights. To provide age-appropriate comprehensive sexuality education based on evolving capacities of adolescents and young people, to improve maternal health and reduce maternal mortality, to reduce the unmet need for contraception and provide access to voluntary contraception within a range of modern contraceptives of clients' choices, and to provide for safe abortion services. Have our promises been fulfilled? Progress has been made, but the rate of decline in maternal mortality remains unacceptable. Unsafe abortion continues to be a major cause of maternal mortality and morbidity, and death from early pregnancy and delivery is on the rise. 140 million couples and individuals wanting to practice family planning are unable to avail themselves of appropriate methods and services just in this region. Challenges remain. Millennium Development Goal 2015 report states that although significant improvements have been made worldwide, progress has been uneven across regions and countries, leaving significant gaps. Millions of people are left behind, especially the poor, the underprivileged, and the disadvantaged. 800 million people still live in poverty, 160 million children are stunted due to insufficient food, and 57 million children of primary school age are still not in school. However, in September 2015, we made newer promises with the start of the SDGs, and this allows us another opportunity to work on our unfinished agenda, for example, to reduce global maternal mortality to less than 70 per 100,000 live births, which is in Goal 3, to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. There's also Goal 5 that we need to pay attention to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, as said by Ms. Yuriko. And this also includes the end to all forms of discrimination against all women and girls, eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls, including trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation, eliminate all harmful practices such as child, early, and forced marriage and genital mutilation, to undertake reforms to give women equal rights to economic resources and empower all girls and women. Indeed, Mr. Distinguished Guest, this is going to be the core of what I'm going to talk to you about, the other point of sexual and reproductive health and the violence that is associated with sexual and reproductive health and rights. While we're still striving to meet the goals of the unfinished agenda today, we are faced with the more challenging issues of sexual and reproductive health and rights and its implications on children, women, and girls. This is due to the changing landscape of Asia's people. Asia is home to the world's youngest populations. We have high population mobility. We see voluntary or forced migration due to competitive demands for foreign labor and domestic help. We have a booming travel, tourism, and entertainment industry. We have an increasing use of modern technology and social media, not only for communication and trading, but also for sexting, grooming, and sex live streaming. We also see fast-changing lifestyle and behavioral patterns, mainly in the young. These scenarios impact on the lives of all individuals, but more so for those exposed to greater vulnerability of abuse, violence, and exploitation, with lifelong implications on their sexual and reproductive health and rights. It is time for us to give this other side of sexual and reproductive health and rights spectrum a greater voice and a greater sight. It is heartening to see that the first time the issue of commercial sexual exploitation of children, girls and women have been recognized as a specific target in the SDGs. Target 8.7 calls for the elimination of all forms of child labor, including child sexual exploitation and trafficking, and all forms of child violence, while Target 16.2 aspires to end child abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against children by the year 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, new patterns of intra-regional mobility, large and growing travel and tourism industry, including domestic tourism, market, political, cultural, and economic diversity, have all led to growing trends of sexual exploitation of girls, children, and women in travel and tourism. ACPACT International is leading a study on sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism, which is expected to be completed this year. This will allow us a deeper insight and understanding of the issue and plan for affirmative action to ensure measures for protection and prevention systems. Another issue that threatens the security and safety of children, women, and girls today is the online sexual exploitation. In the data reported by the U.S. Child Exploitation and Online Protection Center in 2013, it shows that 74% of children were victimized online by someone within their circle of trust, the child's parents, the relatives, family, friends, or neighbors. Children victimized are getting younger, and around 80% are under the age of 10. The typology is also changing with increased severity of violence inflicted upon children in the production of sexual abuse materials, anonymity, impunity, abuse of social and gender norms, poverty, and normalization of child sexual abuse are some of the driving factors. Ladies and gentlemen, the high population mobility in Asia Pacific has also contributed to the high increase in human trafficking. Globally, women and girls account for 75% of trafficked victims, while 27% are children. In East Asia, South Asia, and the Pacific, 47% were trafficked for forced labor, 44% for sexual exploitation, and exploitation in domestic servitude were frequently reported. The trafficking flow within East Asia and Pacific originates mainly from South Asia. Migrant workers, refugees, stateless people, and the economically disadvantaged are more vulnerable to be recruited or lured by agents and traffickers, especially girls and young women. They are coerced into the commercial sex trade, entered into brokered marriages, or forced into prostitution. Trafficking is a gross violation of human rights. The trauma is great, and the sexual and reproductive health complications such as HIV/AIDS, unwanted pregnancies, unsafe abortions, and violence-related injury are serious. Ladies and gentlemen, this region is also home to early forced and child marriage, which is a barrier to global human, social, and economic development. In a report by AFPPD and Australian Aid, it says that a dangerous combination of entrenched poverty and customs that are deeply rooted in patriarchal tradition continue to fuel the harmful practice. Economic strain, customary law, and cultural practices often trump national policies and legislation, rendering many educational programs unable to retain girls despite best efforts. As a result, this practice continues to thrive in the region, even in the countries that have set the legal age of marriage for girls. A continuum of harm affects these adolescent girls in addition to serious sexual and reproductive health consequences. These children live in sexually threatening environments, become victims of physical, psychological, emotional, and sexual abuse, and are forced into social exclusion with restricted access to education and income-generating opportunities. They are trapped in a cycle of sexual exploitation and violence that may continue for the rest of their lives. We need an urgent call of action to eliminate child marriage and prevent sexual exploitation of children, which is timely. We need a continuum of care and protection to empower girls, to educate them, to ensure sexual and reproductive health and education, to address the economic determinants of child marriage, to favor the transition into rights-based sexual norms and practices, and extends special protection measures to children at risk and to build capacities to curb sexual abuse and exploitation of children in child marriage. In doing so, let's not forget boys and men. Programs need to be more effective to sensitize boys and men to be more respectful, caring, responsible, and willing to be supportive in times of crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, let us also not forget the fact that women continue to be targets of HIV and AIDS in this region. And in 2012, there are an estimated 1.7 million women living with HIV/AIDS in the Asia-Pacific region. This reminds us that all sexual and reproductive health initiatives must be HIV and AIDS inclusive. The time has come for us to address the root causes of vulnerabilities and take positive action. No child, adolescent, or young person is immune to violence and exploitation, but some are more vulnerable than others and need our attention and support. We know what matters: gender, age, disability, inequity, family relationships, migration, law and enforcement, child and women protection systems. In addition, local perception of girls and children have to be changed. When children are viewed as commodities and seen as sexual goods, when sexualization of children is increasingly tolerated and customary child marriage is accepted, or when children themselves are willing to exchange sex for money or high-status commodities. In Asia Pacific, the growth of business, economic hubs, and free trade zones and presence of military in conflict zones make the situation more vulnerable and complex. We have to break this culture of silence. What can we do? We can focus on the child, family, neighbors, friends, the community. We can influence, inform, and advocate to the powers that be, whether they be policy and decision makers or religious authorities and groups. We can advocate for the addressal of gaps and inconsistencies in national laws and legislation and align them with international instruments and standards. We can call for policies and programs to be addressed within and across sectors, agencies and disciplines, and for a gender-sensitive, child and adolescent and women-friendly and non-discriminating approaches, and within a framework of closing inequity and economic gaps based on the principles of human rights. We can accelerate progress towards the unfinished agenda of MDG 4, 5, and 6 and speed up poverty alleviation programs. The good news is that governments have taken action, as mentioned by our two previous speakers and the Vice President. International agencies and NGOs are conducting research, case studies, country profiles, and are monitoring progress. NGOs and civil society groups are reaching out to the marginalized and the hard-to-reach groups through targeted interventions and specific approaches, and are advocating for policy and program improvements. A growing body of research and information is available for evidence-based policies and action, and we can share our country experiences for faster action, as is in the objective of this conference. But as NGOs, we need to continue to ask governments to continue and increase political will, commitment to resources, and ability to eliminate all constraints and barriers that impede progress. We need to continue to strive to ask for the will to regard sexual and reproductive health and rights as a basic human right, and the will to end all forms of gender-based violence, exploitation, and discrimination. The SDG framework has provided a platform for this action. Let us all strengthen our resolve to be a part of this commitment, to ensure that no one is left behind, and to be sure that we make the voices of the invisible to be heard, and for them to be inclusive in our programs of action, and to receive the care, protection, and support that they need. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. What I have described to you has also been my personal journey in this field of sexual and reproductive health, and I'm very happy to have shared that with not only with Myanmar, but with many countries in the region. I thank you very much.